Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 296. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about nightlife, whales, and Iceberg Alley as we go to Newfoundland.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. In the first one, Green Day, the band's frontman Billy Joe Armstrong, says he was kicked off a Southwest Airlines flight Thursday for wearing his pants too low. Lest you think this is youthful indiscretion, Billy is 39. Billy, pull your pants up. But he got off fairly light. An altercation broke out on a different Southwest Airlines flight after a passenger refused to turn off his cell phone. The incident occurred Monday on a flight from Phoenix when coming from El Paso. The man turned on his cell phone as the flight was landing. When asked to turn it off, he refused and was met by authorities at the aircraft. This one, I side with Southwest. And then Southwest wasn't really having as much problems as Continental Connection, a turboprop airline, landed at the wrong airport. They did let passengers share a limo ride from Southland Field in Sulphur, Louisiana to their intended destination of Lake Charles Regional, about a half-hour drive away. Missed it by that much. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome the show Candice Walsh, who's come from CandiceDoesTheWorld.com to talk about her home province of Newfoundland, Canada. Candice, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you grew up in Newfoundland?
Yeah, I lived here my whole life in various parts of the province, and right now I'm in St. John's, the capital city.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Newfoundland?
In my opinion, Newfoundland is maybe the most underrated, underappreciated province in Canada because a lot of people won't take the time to come here, but it's definitely the most unique province in Canada.
And you say come there, it's not all that close to a lot of places. You're kind of way out there in the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's pretty isolated.
And so what about Newfoundland? Where would you recommend as people go to Newfoundland? What kind of itinerary would you recommend for them?
Well, Newfoundland is so big that if you want to see the whole province, you kind of need to give yourself a couple of weeks to do it all. I mean, between the east and west coast, there's a good 8-hour drive. So people come to St. John's for the city, to meet people, to soak up the culture, and then they generally head west for Grossmore National Park and the nature and epic scenic views and that sort of thing. And central Newfoundland has a lot of icebergs and whales and that sort of thing. So each place in Newfoundland has a very distinctly different setting, I guess.
And you mentioned icebergs, so that brings up the first question is, when should someone come to Newfoundland? Anytime you're mentioning icebergs, I'm thinking maybe summer.
Yeah, generally icebergs start floating down through Iceberg Alley late spring throughout the summer. We haven't had many icebergs around the St. John's area for the last 2 years, but Twillingate, Fogo, Central Newfoundland, and the Northern Peninsula, they usually have the biggest iceberg traffic, I guess. There's currently the Peterman's iceberg floating down, and it's something like 16 kilometers long or some crazy fact. I can look it up for you if you want me to.
That's all right. And you say icebergs, and I think of a well-known ship that sunk just outside of Newfoundland, as I recall. Isn't that what got the Titanic? So should we really be visiting the icebergs?
Yeah, well, you kind of observe it from a distance. Most of their mass is underwater, so I wouldn't recommend doing it without a tour guide.
So, but they really do, they go out in boats to go see the icebergs, in daylight, I assume, when they can see what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Even 2 years ago when I first moved into my apartment downtown, I remember I woke up one morning and I looked at the window and I could see icebergs from my bedroom window in the middle of downtown St. John's. So sometimes you don't have to go very far at all to see them. You can see them from land.
I don't know that I've ever heard of someplace that does iceberg watching trips. Whale watching, I've heard, of course.
Yeah. Well, usually the whales come around the coast late spring, early summer as well. Mm-hmm. So usually if you're lucky, you can get the icebergs and whales all in one shot. So it's kind of a double package, I guess.
Okay. Well, let's do your itinerary, slow it down a little bit and do it in a little more depth. So you're recommending we start at St. John's?
Yeah. St. John's is a really great city. It's small. There's only about 150,000 people here, but it's a very fun city. There's a great nightlife, lots of art and music going on here. Personally, it's my favorite city in Canada.
And what would you recommend people do or see while they're in St. John's? You say art and music. Where should we go for either of those?
For music, well, you've heard of George Street. It's this crazy street. It was all pubs, and no one's allowed on there unless, no cars are allowed on there except for pedestrians. And basically you walk through and there's pubs and clubs and music's pouring out of everywhere. And there's generally something going on every night of the week. You can hear traditional Newfoundland music to rock music, basically anything you want to find. And there's also the Rooms Art Museum if you want to check out some of the local art scene, which is a great museum, and it documents Newfoundland history really well and covers local artists, international artists, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're into more naturey things, I would recommend doing the Signal Hill hike, which is the hill around Cabot Tower, and it's kind of a tough hike, but it gives you an amazing view of the coastline and the city. And there's also Cape Spear, which is the easternmost point in North America.
The eastern, okay, got it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay. And places you would recommend eating or staying? We're on your couch, I assume.
Exactly. Eating, I can't think of any restaurants off the top of my head, but there's some local dishes you should probably try if you're here. Newfoundland has a lot of unique traditional food. For example, cod tongues, cod cheeks. Sounds gross, but it's delicious.
I didn't even know cods had tongues.
Yeah, they do. And They're really good if you can get past the weird texture.
How big is a cod tongue? I don't know how big a cod is, I guess.
It's bigger than you would think, actually. A couple centimeters long, I guess.
Okay.
And It kind of soft and squishy and has a weird texture, but you put some batter on it and fry it up. It's really good. What else is there? Newfoundland is really dependent on the fishery, or they were, so a lot of our dishes are fish-based, cod, scallops, that sort of thing. We have a lot of berry-based dishes like partridge berry, baked apple jam, that sort of thing. Caribou, moose meat, moose burgers, moose stew. A lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't try anywhere else.
Okay. I wasn't even sure I'd try the cod tongue there, but...
Yeah, you would have to.
Okay. And what's going to surprise me about St. John's? He said, having just said the word cod tongue. What else is going to surprise me about St. John? St. John's. Sorry, I forgot the S on the end.
Yeah, it's okay. Newfoundlanders have a very different way of speaking as well. We're very influenced by the Irish. We're apparently the most Irish place outside of Ireland. So you'll hear a lot of different dialects around town that might be hard to pick up on at first. People talk really fast. They have a certain way of saying things. Sometimes after I have a few beers, you can tell I have an accent. I'm not sure what else, actually.
So the French went to Quebec, the Scotch went to Nova Scotia, the Irish went to Newfoundland. Who went to Labrador?
Exactly. All the Inuit, I guess.
Okay, all right.
Labrador is actually an area I have not explored yet because it's even harder to navigate than Newfoundland. So that's an entirely different world, I think. Oh, and also Newfoundland has their own time zone. We're ahead of everyone else by 30 minutes.
Everyone else in North America, that is.
Everyone else in North America, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you would recommend that we do while we're in St. John's?
Well, if you're going to be here during the summer, I would recommend checking out a couple of the festivals that take place. Our winters are usually not very fun. So when summer rolls around, it's like everyone's out having a great time and enjoying the sun while they still can. So there's like the Newfoundland Folk Fest, there's the George Street Festival, there's the Lantern Festival. There's almost something going on every weekend during the summer here in St. John's.
Okay. And there's plenty of daylight to appreciate it, I would assume, too. In the summer, you're far enough north, you're going to have fairly long days.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Sun probably sets around 9:30 and it rises 5 a.m., perhaps 4 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about other places to see on the island, and I'm assuming we're renting a car.
Yeah, you kind of have to rent a car here.
Okay. And then where would you go next from St. John's?
Grossmorn National Park is actually pretty amazing. The geography there is spectacular. Grossmorn Mountain is actually an inside-out volcano, and some of the world's oldest rock is found there. And there's some amazing hikes. I mean, one day you can hike the mountain itself, and then the next day you can hike the tablelands or Green Gardens, which is a crazy hike with like a lunar landscape that goes from the forest to the beach. And, you know, there's something new to look at every day. It's really cool there.
Okay. Now, you just went completely to the other end of the island.
Yeah.
Is there anything we would want to see along the way before we get there?
Actually, yeah. It's kind of funny because I grew up on the south coast in central Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. So I never really took the time to explore central Newfoundland. And my hometown is really small. I grew up in St. Albans, so there's like 1,200 people there, and it's very quiet. And I just spent 2 weeks there, actually. But while I was home, my family and I decided to just take a little road trip to some of the more remote communities. We took a ferry from Pools Cove to a little tiny settlement called Round Counter, which is inaccessible by roads or anywhere else except by ferry. So we got there, and it was just this amazing town. It was gorgeous, and they had this incredible hike, and there's no roads there, so everyone just kind of drives around on four-wheelers, and I was not expecting it at all. And when we came back to Pools Cove, we're like, well, let's go exploring somewhere else. And we went further south to some really tiny communities like English Harbor, Mozambique, and a place called Wreck Cove, which absolutely blew my mind. To me, it was just as good as Grossmorn, except no one actually knows it's there. It was mind-blowing.
And I'm trying to find where you're going on the map from the area of your hometown. You're heading...
From St. Albans,
yep.
Albans, to Pools Cove, English Harbor, Harbor Breton. It's all on the south coast, all in the same kind of area.
It's all on the which coast?
The south coast.
Okay, got it.
South Central. It's called the Coast of Bays, technically.
Okay. And so it sounds like there is a lot of regular ferry service in that area.
Yeah, there's a lot of islands or just remote communities that have no other way of getting contact with the outside world, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I would definitely encourage you not to believe is that I have any knowledge of Newfoundland at all. So I will ask some silly questions, partially just because of ignorance. I haven't been to this area. In fact, as I was saying before we started recording, I really haven't been to much of Eastern Canada, and I've just really been over the line from the U.S. So this is an area that I've wanted to go. In fact, we were talking about going up to the Maritimes or up to this area this fall, and the trip actually turned into someplace warmer instead because it was actually more expensive, I think, to go here than it was down to Mexico. So we're doing a different trip, and we'll save this for another day. But definitely an area that I'd like to get to. Where else, before we get back over to the other side of the island, over to Grossmorn, where else would you stop along the way?
Well, I mentioned Fogo and Twillingate before. They're kind of actually getting a lot of attention now in tourism because Fogo, for example, has this big multi-million-dollar art gallery and hotel being built there, and they're doing a lot to develop the whole iceberg capital of the world, I guess, kind of thing going on there. So yeah, all those little remote communities along the way are surprisingly really fun to explore. You wouldn't think that a community of 100 people would be that interesting, but to me, that's a real look at Newfoundland lifestyle.
Okay. Yeah. Pick one of those to start with that's one of your favorites.
Well, to be honest, I don't really know that area that well.
Okay.
But right now, with the Coast of Bays area, I cannot wait to go back to Red Cove and go camping somewhere and doing some of the hikes in the mountains even, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Best day you've had in Newfoundland?
Best day?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you mind if I jump back to Grossmorn?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, well, I actually lived on the West Coast for 2 years. I did my first 2 years of university in Corner Brook, and I had never been to Grossmorn, which is like an hour away. So last November, a few of my friends and I decided to go for the long weekend. And yeah, it was the middle of November, and we got up early one morning, and we decided we would hike the mountain. And it was amazingly warm out. We only wore sweaters and long pants, and we were the only people on the entire mountain trail for 6 or 7 hours. It was an incredibly difficult hike, but when you get to the top of the mountain, you see the fjord and the whole landscape and geography of Grossmorn, and it's pretty amazing. And then on the way back down through the trail, we actually ran into a mother moose and her calf and kind of scared them off. And it was just it was so nice to be up there on the mountain all by ourselves and have that quiet kind of setting, I guess.
You talk about running into a mother moose. What are you going to take for granted that you're going to see in Newfoundland that I wouldn't expect?
On the West Coast, a lot of moose.
Okay.
On the East Coast, we have puffins that come here seasonally to nest and raise their babies. We actually have the largest puffin colony in North America in Bay Bulls, just outside of St. John's.
So a lot of wildlife in general is my impression. We're talking about an area that, in the summer at least, is very green.
Exactly. There's long stretches of just complete wilderness. But it's funny because whenever I leave Newfoundland, I'm reminded of how it's different from other places. I mean, we don't have raccoons or skunks or anything like that. And even Cape Breton, just a couple of hours by boat away, has all those things. So it's very much isolated in terms of wildlife as well.
And my impression is very wet.
Yeah.
I see lakes everywhere as I look at the map.
Yeah, we've been having a really wet, dreary summer here on the East Coast, but for the last 2 weeks when I was home in Beta Fair, it was really warm. And like Newfoundland is such a big place, you can probably drive an hour and you'll find sunshine, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're right, it's very wet.
Well, I mean, wet also means green. I mean, wet isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
But we're talking about a place that is, in the summertime, lush and rugged and wet, and probably lots of, I would expect, waterfowl and those sort of things as well.
Exactly. Lots of opportunity for hunting.
Okay.
And fishing as well.
Okay. And what do the tourists come for?
I would say icebergs and whales are the biggest selling point.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I guess just the wildlife and wilderness in general. St. John's, you probably won't get so much of that here, except other than the whales, I guess. But yeah, I guess just that isolation. I mean, it's not like I just did a cross Canada trip, and the further I went from home, the more I realized how different it is here. Just everything is kind of slower, and the hospitality is amazing. And that's not to say the other Canadian provinces weren't amazing. It's just very different.
Sure. St. John's is not Saskatchewan.
Exactly.
Or Manitoba or the big plain states, for instance.
And certainly not the West Coast with the Rockies. It's just
Right. Mm-hmm.
completely different world. And I mean, St. John's is North America's oldest colony, so we have a lot of history here. And I think that kind of gets taken for granted. A lot of people kind of skip Newfoundland because they think it's just like the East Coast everywhere else, but it's not really at all.
And what's still left of that history that we can see?
I mean, architecture here is very old-fashioned. We have a lot of building codes that won't allow too modern structures to go up kind of thing. And pretty much wherever you go, there's some kind of heritage building or statue or monument.
Okay. And I'm going to guess you're not a huge history buff.
No, I'm not at all. I mean, I know the basics.
I can spot them. But is there something that you really have connected to in terms of the history of the place where you grew up? One place that, even though you're not a history buff, you find interesting or would take friends to if you went there?
Well, actually, one of the things I'm really interested in exploring is the abandoned settlements. A lot of communities that were settled in Newfoundland around the coast were temporary fishing settlements that were set up seasonally so that families would come here and fish and then make their way back to England. But eventually people started staying permanently, and once Newfoundland started becoming self-governed, they just couldn't afford to keep up these small communities. So when Joey Smallwood became Premier of Newfoundland, he issued a rule that everyone had to resettle. Certain communities had to move, so thousands and thousands of people were taken from their homes and had to flock to more urban centers. And it was like a very traumatic mark on Newfoundland, and people were left without jobs and were miserable and missed their home, sort of thing. And it's a constant thread in our history. And a lot of those places still have buildings standing, still have churches. I really want to go explore those places. I think it's really cool that history, those ghost towns and all those stories of those families that just forced to move and leave everything behind.
One thing, as I looked at pictures of Newfoundland in preparation for this, that I was a little surprised about is it seemed like the towns were fairly colorful.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm kind of assuming, I see that also in Norway, so I'm kind of assuming that's in the winter we need some color sort of thing. But that's your impression also of Newfoundland, is very colorful?
Yeah. Also, I don't know how factual this is, but I'm also told that it's because, Newfoundland was a very poor settlement, so when people would paint their boats or whatever they have, they would take their leftover paint and paint their houses with it just because it made sense to use it. So that's why a lot of houses are colorful, apparently.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you've seen in Newfoundland that just makes you laugh?
We have some very peculiar town names. For example, there's a town not far from here called Dildo. A lot of people come here just to have their picture taken with that sign. And there's quite a few communities like that spread all over the place, and their origins are completely unknown, and people just make up stories about them. There's Come By Chance. There's Kitty Vitty is another one that sounds funny. Can't think of it off the top of my head right now. But there's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you went cross-country to Canada and you were other places, what did you miss most? Besides your family and friends, what did you miss most about Newfoundland? You just can't get the same...
You can't get the same beer.
Okay.
We have a lot of beer brewed here that we love. There's Kitty Vitty, and then there's also names you'll hear called like Black Horse in India that most Newfoundlanders love and will force you to try it if you come visit.
Okay.
And also just a general family feel here. I mean, most people who still live here now have roots in Newfoundland, and whenever I have people come to visit me in St. John's, like, we go out of our way to introduce them to our city, to our province, and I think people just really fall in love with the whole friendly vibe, really.
Okay. And speaking of introducing and friendly vibe, the one local you wish every tourist could meet?
I think if you took a stroll downtown, you'll come across many locals that you'll want to meet. If they're playing accordion on the corner or just hanging out in the store, there's someone usually willing to talk to you and offer you advice if you need it.
Okay. I don't know if you've had a chance to look what the guidebooks tell you to see in Newfoundland.
Well, not really, because I guess I've lived here my whole life.
Well, that's always the problem, talking to locals. Okay.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, though, if you really want to do something that no one else is doing, go to the South Coast. I really think more people should go experience that place.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we start to wind this down, anything else that people should know before they come? One thing you should pack before you go to Newfoundland.
A pair of hiking shoes.
All right.
Even if you're not into outdoorsy stuff, you can hike Signal Hill just outside the city and still get an amazing view of everything. I guess you kind of need clothes for every season when you come visit, actually. You need something for the rain, something for the sun.
So bring layers.
Bring layers,
okay.
And be prepared.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then last two questions. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Newfoundland when what?
This is a quote from my uncle. When you open the back door and it's sunny, and then you walk at the front door and it's raining.
Okay. And if you had to summarize Newfoundland in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Friendly, colorful, and fun.
Excellent. Well, Candice, thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us about Newfoundland.
No problem.
Where can people read more about your travels?
You can find me at CandiceDoesTheWorld.com or on Twitter at Candice Walsh.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
In news of the community, I heard from David Elwood, sometime contributor to the Amateur Traveler, on the Oklahoma episode with Robert Reed. Thanks for this one, Chris. My father's family is from this area, and it was a real treat hearing the passion in your guest's voice as he spoke of the people and of the state. I really felt closer to my own heritage as he told of traveling the plains and mountains of Oklahoma and mentioned the towns where my relatives still live. This was a great episode and a great guest. Keep them coming. I still laughed all week as Robert tweeted out, "Stay gold, pony boy." Similarly, Lisa Spires responded, "Love this episode. The enthusiasm of the host made me want a road trip to Oklahoma from Los Angeles. Best shape ever. Thank you both for a great show." And what neither David nor Lisa mentioned is I think we might have the record for the most literary references in a single episode of The Amateur Traveler. Robert, next time I can see you, you can pick up your trophy. The nominations for the Podcast Awards opens up September 15th, just in case you happen to know of any podcasts that you truly love. Reminder that there are 3 Boston events that I'll be at. The Meet Plan Go local event, September 27th, as well as the national event later on in October. And then also, apparently, I'll be speaking at PodCamp Boston, which is coming up the first weekend in October. With that, we're going to bring this show to a close. If you have any comments, feel free to do what David and Lisa did. Leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.